I can't bring myself to delete my Facebook account. I haven't updated it since around 2016. It's kind of like a social time capsule of sorts. It doesn't reflect any of the people I've met since 2016. Instead, it contains a roster of people I'm technically friends with whom I haven't seen in ages. Realistically, will I ever see them again? Even though I don't use the site anymore, I can't help but feel like deleting my account will sever the final tie I have to these people. I log onto Facebook maybe once a year, usually by accident. It never left my bookmarks bar. And every time I get sucked back in. Friends and acquaintances from school, coworkers from jobs none of us have anymore, distant family members I met at a wedding once maybe, people I haven't thought of in years. They still post. Well, some of them do at least. How much have their lives changed since the last time we saw each other? How much has my life changed? We don't need each other to keep living. Night in the Woods is a game that has lodged itself into my soul. It is a beautiful, story-driven experience that tackles some pretty heavy themes: long-term friendships, the reverberations of history, family legacies, religion, mental health, but it does so with an emotional honesty and unmistakable snark. And I don't know if I've ever related to a story as much as I relate to Night in the Woods. Even though the story flirts with some profound ideas, not that much really happens in it. Yet, the characters are forever altered by the story's events. The biggest question Night in the Woods asks the player isn't about any of its grand ideals. It's actually a really simple one. It's a question that we all ask every day. What do you want to do tonight? Night in the Woods stars May, a directionless 20-year-old and recent college dropout. She returns to her hometown of Possum Springs, a former mining town whose glory days have long passed. May has no plans, no real goals. She just wanders around town day after day. That's pretty much all Night in the Woods is. Each morning, May will wake up, talk to her mom downstairs, and then be free to roam around town as she pleases. During the day, the gameplay looks and feels like a 2D platformer with some exploration. It functions more like a visual novel. The jumping is in service of the talking. Possum Springs is filled with wonderful characters to talk to. There's Selmers, the stoop poet, Mr. Chazakov, the constellation-loving science teacher, Lori M., the lonely teenage horror buff, Pastor K., the new minister in town, Miss Rosa, the old woman at the pierogi stand, Germ Warfare, the resident weird kid, and many, many more. Each of these characters has their own story that plays out over the course of the game. May witnesses the small, incremental changes that come to pass each day. The characters will have new thoughts, new observations, new ideas of places to go and things to do. The player can interact with as many or as few of these characters as they want to. This is what happens each day in Night in the Woods. But things get interesting when the sun sets. When the player has explored all they want to, they can progress the story by talking to one of May's closest friends, Greg or B. Greg is an impulsive, loud, fun-loving punk who has been friends with May forever. She and Greg are way more trouble together than apart, that's for sure. He works at the Snack Falcon convenience store and, surprisingly, has not been fired. He lives with his boyfriend Angus, and their dynamic as a couple is a little hard to pin down. Maybe they're symbiotic soulmates. Maybe they're together because they're the only two guys in town that are openly gay. B is going through a lot. Her world collapsed before the events of the story. She's filled with resentment and hopelessness, but there's a light at her core. She and May used to be best friends, but they drifted apart as B's hard times got even harder. She works at the old Pickaxe, the local hardware store, and wants to quit, but it's her dad's business. She can't just abandon what little family she has left. The first day May is back in town, the gang meets for band practice, gets dinner, and catches up. May asks about Casey, another member of the friend group. It turns out he hasn't been seen in a while. He hopped on a train and left town for good. He hasn't been heard from since. He escaped the town May returned to. And then they find a severed arm outside the restaurant. Early on, Night in the Woods sets up many mysteries for the player to uncover. Why did Casey leave without telling anyone? Whose arm is this? What are all these embarrassing events people keep bringing up? What caused May to drop out of college in the first place? This first section of the game establishes these mysteries by leading the player from scene to scene. It's pretty linear, but once the second act begins, things get complicated. Night in the Woods is full of wonderful quotes. Seriously, this might be the best written game ever. One of my favorite quotes, it's not my absolute favorite, but it's up there, comes from May's mom as soon as the second act begins. "Friendships are like trees. You have to water them so they grow, and we each only have so much water." And later that night, the player has to water their first tree. After band practice, May is faced with a decision. Does she want to spend the rest of the evening with Greg or B? Greg suggests that they should do crimes, whatever that means. And B sort of wants to visit what's left of the shopping mall. May can't pick both, it's one or the other. Choosing one will naturally progress that character's storyline, but it will also lock away the other for good. Unlike the rest of Night in the Woods, which lets you see pretty much everything if you look hard enough, these hangouts are limited. On a single playthrough, the player will never know what B was up to if they choose to spend their time with Greg. B's life will go on without May. Up until this point, everything has been a story buffet. Take what you want, leave what you don't. This, however, is a full-on story branch. Kind of. In the second act, there are 3 Greg or B decisions that have to be made. The developers crafted 6 sequences, complete with tomfoolery, mini-games, and hit-you-in-the-gut emotional scenes. But they only let the player see half of them. At this point in the story, the 3 scenes that go unselected are the only 3 scenes Night in the Woods has explicitly forbidden the player from seeing. It's fascinating that this decision is the one that holds the most narrative weight. There's no limit on how many poems from Selmers you hear, or how many times you talk to Lori or discuss theology. There are a finite number of days, sure, but those days can be as filled or unfilled as the player sees fit. The nights, on the other hand, deliver an ultimatum. Which tree will you water? Which friend will be your best friend? You can't be best friends with everyone. You can't be everywhere every night. You can't experience all of life. On a first playthrough of Night in the Woods, the choice between Greg or B doesn't seem like that big of a deal. The first time I played the game, I spent the first night with Greg, the second with B, and the third with Greg again. And in that time, May got into loads of trouble with her former partner in crime. The game has 2 ending tracks. If May has spent at least 2 nights with one of her friends, it will trigger a 4th hangout later in the story with that friend. It will also affect some scenes in the ending. There's a key scene in particular where the character who comforts May will be the one she has spent more time with. That being said, the actual events of the ending are the same for both tracks. The only thing that changes is which character May grows closest to over the course of the story. The game asked me which character I'd rather spend time with, and by answering the way I did, I got to learn all about Greg. He and May shared their grief and worries with one another. She found out about his relationship worries with Angus, how Greg loves him but worries that he's not good enough for him. Greg and May got up to their old habits, doing the things they used to as rebellious teens. But things feel different now, as if making trouble isn't as much fun as it used to be. Greg wants to mature for his boyfriend's sake, but is that really true to who he is? May and Greg started the story as friends, and ended up even closer than before. But what about B? Well, I knew she had gone through some personal trauma. I knew that she wanted more than anything to go to college and escape Possum Springs, an emotion complicated by May dropping out for seemingly no reason. I knew that I was missing something, but in a way it didn't matter because May had Greg's friendship. After a few months of raving about Night in the Woods to my partner, we played through it together. When it came time to choose the hangouts, she picked B, Greg, then B again, the exact opposite path I had originally taken. I got to see what would have happened if May and B went to the mall together. I got to learn about her struggles with her family, how lonely she is, how she feels like the world is passing her by while she has to stay put for reasons outside of her control, how she had to mature the most out of their friend group, something that makes May look even more immature by comparison. We got to the 4th hangout scene with B. The 2 of them shared their grief and worries with one another. They started the story as friends and ended up even closer than before. It was kind of a surreal playthrough for me, seeing the exact opposite scenes transpire. It was like glimpsing into an alternate reality. I already knew what would happen if May went to see Greg. I knew about his troubles, about his anxieties, about how lost he really feels behind his cheery exterior. But at the same time, I felt bad for not picking B in my first playthrough. I knew her situation was rough, but I didn't realize just how lonely she really felt. how much she needed someone, even if May isn't the most ideal someone for her. This decision, this common question we've all been asked time and time again, is the most important decision in Night in the Woods. And it's not presented with any sort of fanfare. Choosing who May should hang out with isn't some trolley problem situation. It's just a question that everyone has answered at some point. What do you want to do tonight? My second favorite quote comes from Miss Rosa, the elderly woman who sits in front of the underground pierogi stand. May's grandfather passed away before the events of the story. He was someone May respected and looked up to, and Miss Rosa knew him before even May's parents were born. Whenever May visits her, she's treated to another tidbit of lore from Granddad's younger days. After all, she comes from a family of troublemakers. The story culminates with an absolutely wonderful anecdote about May's grandfather vandalizing a mine boss's car, a story that not even her dad apparently knows. At the end of the tale, Miss Rosa says, "I wanted to pass this story along to you. It was one night, one thing he did, in a lifetime of nights and things he did. What you want to do with that is part of your story now." Night in the Woods has an underlying mystery. Possum Springs has secrets lurking in the darkness. But most of the game is just things. Scenes where not a whole lot happens. May tries to toss pierogies into Greg's mouth. Bee fixes a boiler. Germ meets some drifters. Lori hangs out by the train tracks. Selmers joins a poetry club. These are just things. Things you or I or anyone can do. Things that don't really seem to matter. I'm not going to spoil the big reveal that happens towards the end of the story, but I have to talk about it a little bit. I have to talk about Casey. It turns out the friend who hopped a train and left town for good didn't do that. He's been killed. We never pick no one who's going to be missed. That's a solid rule. Drifters, drunks, and delinquents. All he was going to contribute to society, except a bunch of kids growing up with no dad, was a rap sheet a mile long before whatever set in he'd wind up at. We did him a favor. The scary part is, Casey isn't missed. The friends mentioned him in that early scene in the diner. A missing persons poster hangs by the entrance to the tunnel. Casey's avatar on the computer is still there, but besides that, no one ever mentions him. No one seems to care or even notice that he's gone. Even though May spends the entire game talking to townspeople, no one ever brings up Casey. Not former classmates, not the other kids, not the leaders in town. No one. And I can't help but think, what if it had been Greg instead? What if he had supposedly hopped on a train never to be seen again? His friends would miss him, but would Possum Springs miss a punk kid who smashes light bulbs and breaks into museums? Would Possum Springs really care if the grumpy girl at the hardware store stopped showing up to work? Would Possum Springs miss a directionless dropout roaming around town day in and day out? Would Possum Springs miss anyone? Would Possum Springs miss you? There's a feeling of futility that lingers throughout these side stories. Someone like Pastor Kay, the new minister in town, tries her hardest and does what she can to help, only to be met with opposition. When Selmers performs her impassioned poem at the library, she does so for an audience of 4? It might as well have not happened, right? Possum Springs itself doesn't seem to matter much either. The mine shut down, there aren't any jobs in the area, there's not an art scene, no realistic future where the town thrives, only crawls along until its eventual quiet death. But as May roams its streets, as she meets its inhabitants, we learn that it does matter. Even if someone like Selmers doesn't win a Nobel Prize for poetry, she's still able to create. She's able to get back on her feet after all she's had to overcome. Someone like Lori M might not become the next Cronenberg, but maybe she will make that horror movie someday. She'll keep trying. They all will. One can make the argument that for the bulk of Night in the Woods, nothing really happens. The characters don't spend the majority of the story trying to figure out why there was a severed arm outside the diner. Instead, that just becomes a weird anecdote in a series of anecdotes. Life goes on, and life can be filled with activities that don't really mean anything in a profound, life-altering sense. Yet Night in the Woods finds power in those small, everyday moments, and it does so through its narrative structure. These small moments build up over the course of the game, Choosing to spend time with Greg isn't a big decision, but by making that decision, May and Greg's friendship is forever altered. The things that didn't matter ultimately do. My absolute favorite quote in Night in the Woods happens in an optional scene in which May drags Angus along to go ghost hunting and, eventually, stargazing. Angus, a staunch atheist and skeptic, opens up to May about his past, his history of abuse, and the events that made him lose his faith. He sums up his worldview in a single sentence. I believe in a universe that doesn't care, and people who do. Possum Springs didn't care about Casey. That doesn't mean that no one did. I feel like we all have our own Possum Springs, places that are cold and uncaring, where everything seems meaningless and futile. But if you have a Greg or a B in your life, hold them close, treasure them, because they matter. You matter. As the credits roll, I can't help but wonder if the group of friends will stay in touch. What if Greg and Angus move? What if May gets the mental help she needs and becomes a growing adult? What if B is able to break free of her situation? Will they ever see each other again? Even if they don't, that doesn't change the fact that the time they spent together, the nights they spent raiding abandoned buildings, shopping for groceries, eating donuts, staring at the stars, they all mattered. These characters needed each other. May now has a best friend that she can hold close forever, even if they physically drift apart. And that friendship started by answering a simple question. In a way, it doesn't really matter what happened yesterday or what tomorrow may bring. For tonight, we are together.